My name is Margaret Sinclair, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 62, and I've spent nearly 4 decades navigating courtrooms, drafting opinions, and presiding over cases that determine the futures of countless families. Yet nothing in my career had prepared me for the scene unfolding before me today. I sat at the defendant's table in the Hartford family courtroom, my hands folded neatly in my lap, my navy blazer and white blouse carefully chosen for composure. The room was filled with the quiet hum of whispered conversations, the gallery crowded with family members, friends, and the occasional curious stranger. Across the aisle, my ex-husband, James Whitmore, leaned back with a smug expression, his lawyer's pen tapping rhythmically against a folder of papers. Then, Tyler, my son, of 32, began his testimony. His voice, usually calm and measured, carried an edge I hadn't expected. "She can barely work," he said. The words hit me like a punch to the chest, echoing through the solemn courtroom, as if amplified by every wall. For a moment, I froze, the disbelief rooting me to the spot. How could my own son, raised by me, nurtured, protected, stand there and paint me as unfit? The years I had worked quietly, keeping my judicial career separate from my personal life to shield him from scrutiny, seemed to vanish in an instant under his accusation. I forced myself to inhale, to steady the shock that threatened to betray itself on my face. The magistrate presiding over the case, Judge Patricia Morrison, sat poised behind the bench, her eyes calm but attentive. The murmurs of the courtroom reminded me that every second here mattered, every movement and expression scrutinized. I straightened my posture and prepared to respond, knowing that this first wave of testimony was only the beginning. Tyler's words lingered in the courtroom, each syllable amplified by the heavy silence around him. My mother, Eleanor Sinclair, sat stiffly in the front row, her eyes sharp, unyielding, absorbing every accusation with a nod so slight it almost went unnoticed. Beside her, my sister Lorraine maintained her usual composure, but the faint tightening of her jaw betrayed her agreement. I could feel the weight of their silent reinforcement pressing down on me, an invisible current that seemed intent on dragging me under. As Tyler continued, my mind drifted back to years of subtle criticisms, the undercurrents of disapproval that had defined my relationship with Eleanor. Her comments about my choices, her quiet comparisons to Lorraine, her insistence that I should settle or prioritize family over ambition. All of it felt present again, sharper in this courtroom, magnified by the public stage. The divorce, too, replayed in flashes, James's constant skepticism, his polished arguments against me, the nights spent wondering if I'd done enough to shield Tyler from the tension swirling around us. Sitting there, I felt the familiar sting of isolation, a loneliness that even my years on the bench had never dulled. Every eye in the gallery seemed to weigh my every move, every gesture of composure scrutinized. And yet within that isolation, a flicker of resolve began to take shape. I had faced adversaries in courtrooms far larger and more complex than this. I had argued cases that demanded patience, strategy, and timing. I straightened my spine, letting my hands rest lightly on the table. I would respond not with anger, but with precision. Every accusation would meet evidence, every assumption countered by truth. The betrayal stung, but it had also lit a fire. The court might see me as a mother under attack, but I would make them see me as Margaret Sinclair, unwavering, capable, and unshakable. Tyler's voice carried across the courtroom, again firmer this time, as he painted a portrait of instability I barely recognized. "She disappears for days," he said, eyes fixed somewhere between the judge and the gallery. Claims she's working, but I've never seen evidence of any steady job. My apartment is tiny, my car old, and she struggles even with basic expenses. The words cut through the air like a knife, each one carefully measured to sway the court. James Whitmore's lawyer, a tall man with sharp spectacles and a clipped tone, rose to emphasize Tyler's testimony. Your Honor. He began these details illustrate a pattern of neglect and inconsistency. The child's best interests clearly demand consideration of these facts. The mother's so-called employment is vague at best and cannot justify the instability presented. His voice carried an undertone that suggested every word had been rehearsed, polished, to highlight my supposed inadequacy. I could feel the tension coil in my chest, but I allowed my mind to drift briefly to the countless nights I had juggled motherhood with decades-long judicial responsibilities. The long hours spent drafting opinions, the nights attending case conferences, the early mornings reviewing briefs, each act of dedication invisible to the very people who now questioned my ability to care for my own son. Tyler's misunderstanding of my absences was palpable. He had been misled perhaps by James's careful framing, or by Eleanor's subtle insinuations over the years. A flicker of recognition crossed his face at a pause in his statements. A momentary hesitation that hinted he was not entirely the architect of this narrative. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as his testimony continued, amplified by the lawyer's insistence. Yet, I sensed the misalignment between perception and reality. I leaned back slightly, steadying my hands, recalling the lessons learned over decades on the bench, patience, timing, and the careful orchestration of truth. This assault, no matter how orchestrated or personal, was not insurmountable. I would meet each allegation with evidence, each misrepresentation with clarity. What my family and the court did not yet see was the full measure of my life, the professional dedication and personal sacrifices that Tyler had never fully witnessed. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder as Tyler finished his account, leaving a charged silence in its wake. I exhaled slowly, letting the words settle, and readied myself for the next move, knowing that the tide could turn if I played this moment with precision. I waited until the courtroom's murmurs settled before rising slowly from my seat. The polished wood of the defendant's table felt cool beneath my hands, grounding me as I projected a calm I did not yet feel. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady. I would like to call a witness to address the concerns raised about my employment and stability. A ripple of surprise moved through the room. James's lawyer straightened eyes, narrowing his confident posture, momentarily faltering. Across the gallery, Eleanor's grip on her handbag tightened, and Lorraine's expression flickered with unease. Even Tyler, sitting rigidly in his chair, blinked once confusion, briefly replacing certainty. The air shifted, every eye in the courtroom now focused on me, anticipation, heavy in the stillness. Judge Patricia Morrison inclined her head slightly, maintaining her composed demeanor. You were not notified of a witness. James's lawyer said, his tone sharper, now attempting to mask the crack in his confidence. I allowed a small, deliberate pause before responding. The witness became available this morning, Your Honor. I believe their testimony will clarify any questions regarding my employment and professional responsibilities. A subtle tension hung over the courtroom. The audience leaned forward in curiosity. The gallery, previously murmuring quietly, now sat in anticipatory silence. Every person there, from my family to strangers, was unaware of who I would call or the weight their words might carry. I returned to my seat, sitting upright, letting my measured composure signal that I was not merely reacting but directing the course of events. The murmurs softened, replaced by a quiet, expectant hush. For the first time in the hearing, the momentum began to shift slightly, the weight of accusation balanced by the possibility of revelation. I folded my hands calmly in front of me, each breath deliberate, aware that the next moments could redefine the entire proceeding. The courtroom waited, suspended in anticipation, as I prepared to turn this tide with a single carefully chosen step. The courtroom remained suspended in quiet anticipation as I straightened my blazer and addressed Judge Morrison. Your Honor, I would like to call Chief Justice William Barrett to the stand. A collective gasp rose from the gallery, sharp and audible. Whispers rippled through the room, a mixture of shock and disbelief as the name registered. James Whitmore's lawyer froze mid-sentence papers, trembling slightly in his hand. Eleanor's face turned pale, her rigid posture faltering for the first time. Lorraine's fingers tightened on the edge of her chair, and Tyler's eyes widened, uncertainty and curiosity warring across his features. Minutes later, a tall man with impeccably styled silver hair and an air of commanding authority entered the courtroom. Every step he took seemed to demand respect, and even the murmurs softened as he approached the witness stand. I could feel the shift in energy immediately. Suddenly, the momentum that had favored accusation was tilting. Chief Justice Barrett. I began, my voice carrying through the sudden hush. Could you please identify me for the court? His voice was formal, but warm. You are the Honorable Margaret Sinclair, Associate Judge of the State Supreme Court, where you have served with distinction for 35 years. The words struck the room like a thunderclap. The gallery went silent, and I could see my mother's hand tremble slightly as she gripped her handbag. Tyler blinked rapidly as if trying to reconcile this revelation with the portrait of his mother he had just painted. Chief Justice Barrett continued outlining my responsibilities, overseeing complex civil and criminal cases, chairing the Judicial Ethics Committee, and presiding over appellate panels. He spoke of landmark decisions I had authored, the committees I had led, and the countless hours devoted to ensuring justice across the state. Each sentence punctured the narrative of instability, carefully woven by my ex-husband and reinforced by my family. A minor delay earlier that morning had nearly prevented him from appearing. A scheduling conflict had left me holding my breath until the last moment. Yet here he was, lending credibility to every fact I had worked silently to achieve. I returned to my seat, letting the gravity of the testimony sink in. The courtroom's atmosphere had shifted palpably. What had been accusation was now met with undeniable authority. Eleanor's eyes darted to Tyler, whose expression had softened the certainty of his earlier claims, now tinged with hesitation. For the first time, the possibility that the truth might prevail felt tangible. Chief Justice Barrett's testimony seemed to ripple through the courtroom, each word redefining the air of accusation that had hung so heavily. He detailed the scope of my judicial career, speaking deliberately of the complex civil, criminal, and appellate cases I had overseen. He mentioned the ethics committee I had chaired for years, the landmark rulings that had shaped family law and child welfare policy across the state. Every sentence reinforced not only my professional accomplishments, but the depth of responsibility I had carried for decades. He then addressed my financial and personal stability. My salary as a sitting judge, now retired, had provided steady income for years. Pension contributions, property ownership, and even the modest downtown apartment I had maintained were noted with precision. I could sense the courtroom adjusting, recalibrating its assumptions. No longer was I the precarious mother portrayed by Tyler and amplified by my ex-husband. The image they had painted was unraveling in real time. Tyler, seated in the front row, blinked slowly. His previous certainty replaced by a dawning understanding. Whispers echoed from the gallery, a mixture of astonishment and incredulity, while Eleanor's expression shifted from smugness to something resembling disbelief. Lorraine's lips pressed tightly together, her composure faltering as she absorbed the breadth of my career and the years of dedication they had never considered. Even James's lawyer appeared momentarily thrown off balance, a subtle tension creeping into his posture as Barrett continued enumerating my achievements with calm authority. The courtroom's energy had shifted, no longer dominated by accusation, but tempered by undeniable evidence. For the first time, I felt the balance of power tilting toward truth, as if the authority I had quietly wielded in courtrooms across the state had followed me here, validating every sacrifice, every long night, every moment spent balancing motherhood with professional duty. I returned to my seat, hands folded, letting the weight of the testimony settle around me. The transformation was palpable. Where once I had been portrayed as unstable, I now radiated the presence of someone who had earned respect through decades of unwavering commitment. Tyler's eyes, wide and bright, met mine briefly, and I saw in them the first flicker of pride and comprehension. For the first time in this hearing, the possibility that justice and truth could prevail seemed entirely within reach. I took a deep breath and rose once more, letting my presence fill the courtroom with measured authority. "Your Honor," I began, "I understand why these allegations have been made, and I would like to clarify why aspects of my professional life were kept private from my family." The murmurs quieted as all eyes turned toward me. I explained that I had intentionally shielded Tyler from the scrutiny and pressure that comes with knowing his mother served on the state Supreme Court. Every decision, every ruling, every late night spent drafting legal opinions was driven by a desire to give him a childhood untainted by expectation or envy. As I spoke, fragments of memory surfaced. Long nights alone in the courthouse library, balancing mountains of briefs with bedtime stories. Early mornings spent reviewing case files while preparing school lunches. Meetings and conferences that kept me away from soccer games, parent-teacher conferences, and family dinners. Each sacrifice, I realized, had been invisible to those now questioning my dedication. I noticed the courtroom's reactions shifting subtly. Eleanor's hands, previously clenched, relaxed slightly as she listened. Lorraine's eyes, still guarded, flickered with curiosity rather than judgment. Tyler's gaze softened, his earlier certainty replaced by the beginning of comprehension. Even Judge Morrison inclined her head just slightly, acknowledging the balance between professional duty and personal intention. I returned to my seat, letting my words linger in the still air. The atmosphere had changed. The audience no longer viewed me solely as a mother under attack, but as someone who had devoted decades to both justice and the well-being of her child. Every sacrifice, once invisible, was now beginning to be understood, bridging the gap between perception and reality, and revealing the true measure of commitment behind my choices. I rose once again, this time carrying a folder of documents that had been carefully prepared over the past week. Each page was a piece of truth meticulously compiled to counter every claim leveled against me. I approached the judge's bench and laid the materials before Judge Morrison. Judicial performance reviews, spanning decades, detailed financial disclosures, and comprehensive custody evaluation reports from Dr. Sandra Williams, a court-appointed child psychologist. The courtroom, which had grown quiet in anticipation, now hummed with the weight of tangible proof. I began to summarize the evidence, highlighting my consistent record of professional excellence and ethical conduct, the steady management of my finances, and the careful attention to Tyler's well-being despite the demands of my judicial career. Dr. Williams was called to testify. She spoke with calm authority, describing her observations of Tyler and my parenting over the past several years. She noted his emotional security, the strong bond he shared with me, and his overall well-being, confirming that there was no evidence of neglect or instability. Her words landed firmly in the room, each one undercutting the narrative my ex-husband and family had been constructing. I observed the reactions around me. Eleanor's expression, previously so composed, now reflected the first hints of doubt. Lorraine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her gaze flickering between her mother and Tyler. Even James Whitmore's lawyer, who had seemed confident and assertive, paused mid-argument, papers rustling as he attempted to regroup. Tyler's eyes, once filled with certainty about my supposed failings, now softened as he studied my face. I could see the admiration slowly replacing the earlier confusion. For the first time, he understood the quiet sacrifices, the long hours, the delicate balance I had maintained to provide him with a normal childhood while fulfilling professional responsibilities. By the time I returned to my seat, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted entirely. The story that had been carefully constructed against me was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Where accusation and doubt had dominated, clarity and truth were beginning to take hold, validating years of dedication and sacrifice that had previously gone unseen. Judge Morrison cleared her throat and adjusted the papers before her. Based on the evidence presented, the testimony provided, and the best interests of the child, the court grants full physical custody of Tyler Sinclair to Margaret Sinclair. Supervised visitation for James Whitmore will be arranged for the next 6 months, subject to review following completion of court-ordered parenting classes. The words echoed through the courtroom, final and unwavering. Relief flooded Tyler's face, the tension that had haunted him since the start of the hearing dissipating in an instant. He let out a quiet breath and reached for my hand, the simple gesture grounding both of us in the reality of this long-awaited moment. Eleanor's expression froze, her lips parting slightly as shock overtook her composure. Lorraine's hands tightened against her knees, and James slumped back in his chair, his confidence thoroughly dismantled by the weight of the court's decision. The courtroom felt suspended in the residue of disbelief, the silence punctuated only by the rustling of papers and quiet murmurs among the gallery. I allowed myself a small, controlled exhale, feeling the relief and satisfaction of victory, tempered by the lingering ache of years of misunderstanding and emotional wounds. The fight had been necessary, but the cost had been measured in fractured trust and moments lost. Tyler's fingers tightened around mine, and I looked into his eyes, seeing both the innocence restored and the recognition of sacrifices he had only just begun to understand. The legal battle had concluded, yet the emotional work rebuilding trust and repairing family bonds was only beginning. The courtroom had emptied, leaving only the echo of finality and the quiet footsteps of those departing. Tyler stayed close by my side, his hand brushing against mine as we walked toward the courthouse exit. I knelt to meet his gaze, and for the first time in weeks, I saw pride and understanding reflecting back at me. I spoke gently, explaining the lessons this battle had taught us, both about integrity, justice, and the responsibility that comes with making difficult choices. Outside, Eleanor lingered hesitant, her earlier confidence replaced with the fragile uncertainty of remorse. She approached slowly, voice tentative. "Margaret." I hadn't realized. "I'm sorry." I acknowledged her words with a nod, understanding that reconciliation would require time, effort, and patience, but the possibility now existed. Lorraine followed quietly, offering a subtle glance that conveyed both acknowledgement and regret. I realized that keeping my career private had protected Tyler's childhood, but it was also time to embrace my accomplishments openly. Speaking with him about the cases I had handled, the hours I had devoted to justice, and the principles that guided every decision I saw, his admiration grow, his respect deepening. He now understood the balance I had maintained, the sacrifices made, and the life we had quietly built together. As we left the courthouse, I felt a calm resolve settle over me. Integrity and respect are earned through honesty, diligence, and steadfast commitment, not assumptions or appearances. Standing for oneself requires courage, and rebuilding trust after betrayal demands patience. Today I had demonstrated both, and in doing so, I had reclaimed not only my authority, but also the foundation of a relationship rooted in truth and mutual respect.